Hermie at the American Federation for Children. He's the Director of School Partnerships.
Good afternoon. Knowing I'm standing in between you and dinner and the rest of your evening here, we'll try to make this as quick and painless as possible. I'm reminded of being a high school English teacher in the last period of the day, trying to avoid what I called Migo complex, which is my eyes glaze over with my kids because they were so fatigued after having 7 classes before mine that day. So we'll make a good effort to get through this, hopeful to have some participation from you all. So as Denisha said, I'm with the American Federation for Children. If you're not familiar with our organization, we're a national school choice network that engages in the formation, expansion, and defense of school choice nationwide. So we do this work through elections, we do this work through legislative activity, and we also do it from an increasing amount of grassroots activity, including school outreach, which is where I come in. I always like to say I'm an educator doing policy work. I spent 15 years in the Diocese of Phoenix as an English teacher, a dean of students, and then I was a K-8 principal. So I always love the opportunity, and I'm grateful to Denisha today to be with you all because I'm most at home with educators. And I have a deep level of respect for those of you who are school founders because the high school I worked at when I started there, I started second semester of our first year we were open, and I remember what a heavy lift that was, so I can only imagine as founders the heavy lift you all have gone through to get your schools up, operational, and serving your kids. So thank you for taking the time to be here today. So one of my roles at AFC is to help school leaders understand the need for their voice in the push for school options for our children in the environment that best fits their needs. And I was struck this morning when Representative Maynard was up here with Denisha. I love when we have state representatives come to these meetings with educators, and I love when they make the statement, your voice is important. Because you as school leaders have a lot on your plate. I'm sure coming here today and being here tomorrow is a lot to be away from your campuses. And I want to recognize that because it's important you're here, it's important you realize the power your voice has in legislative activities as it pertains to these opportunities for kids. I'm not going to put you through the usual reflection I do, but I will ask you to humor me for a minute. When I talk about advocacy, I think people immediately go to legislative advocacy, but I think as school leaders, advocacy is different for us. We advocate for our kids every day in many different ways. We advocate for them with their teachers, with their parents, with their peers. Advocacy is just something we do, and it's innate to us. As such, I don't think we realize the power we have to advocate with stakeholders in our communities, including those who represent us down at the Capitol. But you hold a lot of value for them for a number of reasons, and we'll touch on that as we go through. I'd also like to touch on why school leaders have shared with us over the last 4.5 years I've been doing this work, they're reluctant to get involved in advocacy, and talk about some of those realities and hope that some of you who maybe aren't entrenched in advocacy yet will see a path forward, because I believe one thing, there is a place in advocacy for every school leader. It's just about what you're comfortable with and what you're permissible to do based on your school, network, your board, as you may have it. So the easiest way to become an advocate is simply to educate yourself. And that's something we've done our whole lives. It's something we excel at as we've moved through coursework into running schools. So when I talk about school choice, there are three key groups that impact school choice options for kids. Parents have been since 1990 and always will be the drivers of school choice. The reason options exist is because parents want them for their children, and they want environments that their children they feel can be successful in. Me personally, I'm agnostic to environment. Public school choice, private school choice. I live in Arizona, which you've heard about a couple times today. We have extensive options in both the public and private arena. Our families are very fortunate for that. But it takes a lot to defend those options and to make sure they're serving kids well. Legislators are our framers and our champions. Without them, no bill gets brought into committee, no bill gets put on the Senate or House floor and voted on, nothing makes it to the governor that gives kids options. Legislators, I think people oftentimes see what goes on C-SPAN, on CNN, Fox News, everything you see, and we get this picture of what a legislator is. I'm always struck when we bring legislators like Representative Maynard. Last week I had an event with school leaders I did in Phoenix where I brought a legislator from Nebraska and had a former legislator from Arizona. And what I hope you see and what you already know is they're there to serve us. And these people are normal people. Oftentimes they have second jobs. Like us, they have long days, busy schedules, but they are there to serve us. And so we need to be using our voice with them as we go through. And the third impactful group, my favorite group, is school leadership. And I refer to school leadership as the glue of the school choice movement. And my reason for that is simple. School leaders are the only group that can impact all three phases of school choice. We can participate in the advocacy process by helping form better policies and by advocating with our legislators. We impact implementation. None of those other two groups can enroll kids in our schools. Parents, some can homeschool. I know you have some homeschool people in here too, so that may fit that a little bit. But the implementation of these programs is largely up to you as school leaders. You have to adhere to the rules set forth by the state, and you have to follow all the policies. And then the last one, and what's becoming the key element for being the glue for school leaders, is evidence. Too often, people who oppose options for kids can get up and make statements and have no consequences because there's no data and no examples to show that what they're asserting is incorrect. The only people who can bring that data to the floor and to the conversation is you all. You have it at your fingertips. Parents can bring their single student's data, and that can be powerful, but nothing is more powerful than a school leader coming in backed by 5 to 10 parents to make a point and assert something about options and opportunities. So let's talk advocacy for a second here. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have actually gone down to your state capitol and testified in front of a committee? Just a couple, okay, a few. For those of you who haven't, that's fine. There are many ways you can impact this process as an advocate, but some things to be aware of. You're all well aware that laws regarding education oftentimes are put into practice without the input of educators. You have think tanks and you have different groups who bring these policies forward based on studies. And educators, the people doing the work on the ground, are never involved in the conversation. And as such, what we get are policies that don't always serve the best interests of our kids in our schools. Also, the fact that a lot of people voting on legislative policy don't have the expertise you do. I hear from school leaders all the time, well, I'm not a politician, I'm not into politics. Well, politicians aren't educators, most of them. They don't have your experience, your background, your knowledge base that can bring clarity and perspective to the conversation. So you are key. What works for one group of schools doesn't always work for another. And there's a lot of truth in that, which drives me to another point, which if you're not speaking for your schools and your kids, someone else will speak for you. And what they have to say may not serve your students, your school, in the best possible fashion. You have to be part of the conversation. And then the last one was one that actually drove me to this work. Like I said, I'm from the state of Arizona. We've had a tax credit program in place since 1997 that's allowed our parents to have private school choice. Our charter network is extensive. We have open enrollment in our public schools. Now I tell this story basically just to show from perspective when I stand up and talk to groups of educators. When I took over my last school, we had declining enrollment. I replaced the principal who had been there for 26 years. By his own admission, he'd stayed for 5 too long. Our enrollment had gone from 580 students down to about 350. And so when I took over the school, it was clear to me something needed to change, or I would be taking over a 75-year-old school that wouldn't see year 76. And so I lost a lot of sleep over admissions that first year. And I called a lot of families who had left our school to ask why, to try to find out why our school was no longer serving their families well. I was told a lot of things, but a lot of it just came back to cost. We were a private Catholic school. Families didn't feel like they could afford it. And I recognized that the biggest hurdle I had was myself, because I was not informed enough on the programs. I had not taken the time to learn them as I had worked in the diocese for the previous decade to understand the benefit to our families and how I could be impacting the process. So when I started taking ownership of that and learning more, one of the things I came to see is that these programs we'd had in place for 2 decades weren't guaranteed to be there. Every session, people would bring 7 to 8 bills that would look to minimize or abolish the tax credit and ESA programs we had in Arizona. And it was groups like AFC, who I came into contact during this time, that would fight them off year after year. Yet we'd had them for so long and they'd been so successful, we as school leaders never felt the need to learn, to advocate, to interact. It was apathy, largely. We just accepted that they were there and thought they'd always be there. So we have to be aware that even once a policy is in place, it can be minimized, it can be abolished, it can be taken away, and therefore the fight never really truly ends. So in going around and talking to school leaders for a number of years, I've come up with the top 5 administrator concerns regarding advocacy, and some of you may fit into these buckets. The first one is I don't live in the same area my school is located in, and therefore I'm not a constituent of the elected officials in the school's area, and I should tag in there, so why would they want to talk to me? Because that's normally the tag that comes at the end of this. And I can't remember if it was Shaka or Nathan this morning on the panel who made the point. Actually, you're the CEO of your business. You're like any business owner that's zoned into that district. Wherever you are, your school's located, whether you live in that district or not, a lot of your families do. And I can tell you right now, I call this the parking lot parent paradox. We all have parking lot parents we deal with at our schools, for good or for bad. I like to turn it around for good. It's the same thing with legislators. You know, when we're sitting there in the afternoon, especially when we're young administrators and we get 4 or 5 emails about the same thing from a group of parents, there's a certain level of panic that can set in because we think we have this giant problem permeating the school. And the reality of it was there were 3 parents who got upset about something in the parking lot after school and all sent emails. The same is true for legislators. They'll tell you often that they don't hear from school personnel very often, especially private school personnel and anyone outside of the regular public schools. So when they get 4 or 5 emails from private schools in their district, and they understand that you may serve upwards of 100 families at your school, and they start doing the math on how many voters that is, you will get a response, and they will take the time to reach back out to you. So you may not live in that district, but you are the CEO of your institution, and therefore they want to talk to you. The other reality, I call this the bonus. If you don't live in that district, that's great, because then you can go talk to your representative in your home district as well and continue to push forward. I don't feel comfortable testifying in public. I get this. First time I testified, it was at the local level. There was a business trying to put an outdoor dog run right next to my kindergarten playground, which had a 5-foot-high wall. And so the neighborhood and our parish were pushing back against the creation of that. And I was ordered by my pastor to go down and take care of this at the city. So I went down to the city council meeting, walked in the door, cameras pointing at this lectern sitting in the middle, people sitting up on the dais in front, and me kind of standing there, and I was intimidated. Wasn't sure what I was going to say, and I got up and did what I usually do, which is try to make my 3 good points and then sit down. And what that taught me is, you know, a lot of times it's overcoming that first hurdle. But even if you never get to the point you testify in public, you have the ability to testify in writing, you have the ability to testify over the phone, and you have the ability to testify in person in their offices through meetings. So it doesn't always have to be public testimony that moves the needle. I don't have time to leave my school to go to the legislative offices. I'm going to say this is fair. You are busy. There's a lot going on in your school day. But I did have a moment a few months ago where I was talking to a school principal. He said, look, I got to talk to teachers, I got to talk to kids, I got to deal with parents, I got to walk people around on tours, and I've got all this stuff I have to do. Where do I have time to advocate? And I said, well, if you invite a legislator to your school and you walk around, you talk to kids, you talk to parents, you talk to teachers, and then you sit them down at the end and talk to parents, you're advocating in a very strong way and showing your school to be a place kids should be educated at, and they should have the opportunity to come. A lot of our time is what we make of it, and finding ways to put advocacy into our daily schedule where we can. I know you're busy, I understand. It's one more thing when someone asks you to come advocate for these opportunities for kids, but I would argue it's an important thing. It's the lifeblood of your school. It's the way you fulfill your mission is by bringing more families to your schools. I don't know politics, nor do I care for them. What can I add to the equation? I touched on this a little bit earlier. You add a lot. I talked to a legislator a couple years ago, and he's not on an education committee. He's in Arizona. He's still in the state Senate. But he had a relationship with a school leader, and every time a bill comes up on education, if he needs to ask a school person what to do, how to vote, or to get information on it, he texts that school leader to say, how should I vote on this? And he admitted in a group session a couple weeks ago with school leaders that if he doesn't know how to vote, he just looks to the ranking party member and votes with them. So when you look at that, you have the opportunity in building relationships to help inform and move the needle. So what can you add? You can add a lot through your expertise and your experience. So common questions about participation. If you go down to testify, what are the questions legislators going to ask? Again, I think C-SPAN sometimes is your enemy with this one. People look at public hearings a lot of time and they're combative. The reality is when you go to testify, a lot of times you're given 2 minutes to speak. So you have to make sure you make your points really quick and then move on. The only time you're given more than that is if you're asked a question. So when you go in, I always tell school leaders, have your ask, have your data, and have your emotional appeal. If you have those 3 things and you can communicate them in 2 minutes, likely they're gonna thank you for your time and move on. If they ask you a question, you have the chance to educate them some more. How many of you have given school tours to legislators? Just out of curiosity, okay. If you haven't, you're interested in doing that, but you don't know how to approach that, we can help you. Talk to Denisha a little bit at AFC. We have our state teams that'll help you as well. I get asked a lot, well, if a legislator comes to my school, what do I show them? And my response is always, what do you show a prospective parent when they come to your school? Show them that. Show them the kids in the classroom. Let the kids ask them questions. Let them see how the kids are learning, how they're benefiting from things. The only thing I would do different on a school tour for a legislator than you probably do for your regular parents who come in looking at your school, set up an opportunity for 4 or 5 parents to sit down with them at the end of the tour. And have some just kind of questions mapped out for your parents to ask the legislator, and for the legislator, allow them to talk to your parents. Let the legislator see your parents, let them talk to them. It's an opportunity to meet with their constituents, which they love, because they don't get the opportunity to do that a lot. And it's an opportunity for your parents to tell the story of your school and the good work you're doing with your kids. And again, that helps our goal of making the kids human and not statistics in the eyes of the people voting. So that's very important. If I agree to go to the office of a legislator, what takes place? Oftentimes, if you want to do this, again, we have advocate organizations which will help you set up your appointments, and just go in with some talking points, go in with your data. It's no different than testifying. The only difference is this time you have a little bit longer format you can work with them in. I always talk about bringing leave and go folders. Put some of your school information that you would put in your admissions information in a folder, but also put a letter in there from you with your ask. What are you asking of them? And leave that there with them. They may not take the time to look at it, but they have staff who, if you develop relationships well, the staff will read that, and whenever you ask to vote them on, when it comes up and they ask their staff, what do I need to know about this? How do I vote? A lot of times that staff will go back to the letter you wrote, quote statistics out of it or quote facts out of it to give that representative to go out and either speak on the floor or make the vote on. How do I know when bills are being presented? Again, AFC, if you have other organizations in your state that helps schools with this work, we can tell you what's up in the legislature for votes and when it's happening and when you have an opportunity to be involved. Just reach out to us and we're happy to help you. So I often joke that for me, when I tried to do this work in the beginning, when I realized the need to get involved, pretty much my understanding of the legislative process could be traced back to 3rd grade Schoolhouse Rock, how a bill becomes law. I'm not going to show it to you. We're getting close to dinner time. I'll let you look it up on YouTube on your own. But I would argue for a lot of us in school leadership, it's either that or high school civics class was the last time we really studied the legislative process, unless you're a high school history teacher and then you taught it and you know it. But this is a very simple look at this, and understanding that the legislative process is different in every state. But understanding when your voice can be heard is important in the process. And typically in this process, when you look at it, those committee hearings that pop up in the 1st and 2nd chamber are when you have the opportunity to go testify in person. But what I would tell you is the relationship building you do with your legislators needs to start happening back in the idea phase, because having those relationships established gives you more credibility and will allow them to have a better opportunity to understand the work you and your community are doing for your parents and your kids. So it's critical. So we talked about all these things that you can do in the various roles you have. I think the hardest thing in there is time, because as school leaders, you're there because you care about kids and you want to benefit them. You know how your schools run, you know how your schools benefit the kids. A lot of times it's a time issue. A good friend of mine, John Elsesser, who's the head of the Indiana Non-Public Education Association, has what he calls a legislative liaison program. And it's designed for school leaders who don't have time to advocate to the level they want to. And what it's designed to do is have an information person, someone who receives the emails, someone who passes along the information to the head of school and makes them aware of when there are opportunities to advocate. It basically takes the legwork off of the head of school. So if this is something you'd like to be involved in, but time is an issue, the legislative liaison is a good tool to utilize. So I'm keeping you from dinner, so I'm not going to go into this very deeply here. We often work with schools on maximizing enrollment through school choice programs. And so these are some ways I usually talk about to maximize that. I will say the one I'll single out, I put a handout on your table. How many of you hold events? If you're private, micro, you have school choice, how many of you hold events on how to afford tuition at your school, just out of curiosity? Not yet? Okay. I would highly recommend you do that. The example I gave there is a sample of what a session could look like. I would recommend you hold these at least 2 times a year, each semester, for prospective families, and I would recommend that once a year you make sure you're letting your current families know that you're holding these events. Life happens and realities change, and a lot of times students and families just disappear out of our schools because something's happened that they may not be comfortable discussing with you, but if they know what tools and what availability scholarship-wise is there for their family, they can remain in your school. One of the things I'll say about that is you look at it on the itinerary, probably the most impactful thing we did when we started holding these events was we added in a parent who was using school choice programs to talk to other prospective parents. The number one hurdle we had to overcome with the programs was convincing people they were real and they worked. I could stand up, talk about it till I was blue in the face. My business manager could talk about it, but it wasn't until the parent got up and started talking to the other parents about how this worked, how it benefited their child. I would say that one addition to this itinerary probably increased our closure rate by at least 25 to 30% with families. It just, the credibility of another parent talking to a parent cannot be understated. If you have any questions about any of this other stuff, I'll be at dinner. I'm happy to talk through any of it. I do want to focus a bit on evidence here. We talked about this being the third aspect of it. This is becoming increasingly more important, especially if you're in a school choice state. The reality is school choice is winning at the courts repeatedly right now. Programs that have been held up for a year, 2 years, 2.5 years, Supreme Court decisions are coming down in favor of school choice opportunities. And so opponents are looking for new ways to derail these opportunities. They can't get it done through the courts. So what they're starting to cite is issues ranging from accountability all the way down to basically low funding amounts. So they'll make the argument that, yeah, you can pass that program, but the funding amount's so low, no one's going to want to use it anyway. And so disproving these things are important. So what can you do? Tomorrow you're going to hear from my colleague, Katie Linehan. She's going to talk about communicating the school choice message. And we're pressed for time, and I don't want to steal her thunder with that. But you are unique in the fact that you have success stories walking through every door in your school every day of the way your students are thriving in your schools because they've had opportunity. You need to be telling those stories. Katie will talk about tomorrow our Voices for Choice initiative. We have over 800 stories from families nationwide of how school choice has positively impacted their children and their schools. So we need to continue to tell these stories. We need to keep bringing them to the forefront. The reality is, an advocacy organization, we try to find these families, but the real reality is you know these families, and they're in your schools. And if you're willing to empower them to tell their stories, all you're doing is helping provide them with more information and more opportunity. Let the data be the proof, and I've talked about this a little bit. Sharing testing results is a tricky proposition for a lot of schools for a number of reasons. But I long for the day when a state legislator says private schools aren't accountable, that 5 private school leaders go marching up to the Capitol with their nationally norm reference test data and 5 parents behind them to lay it out across the table in front of the legislator, have the parents talk about conferences, interventions, how things are done around school to be accountable to the parent, and then ask the legislator, how are we not accountable? because this is the most consistent argument making its way around from opponents right now. Private schools aren't accountable, and they don't want to be accountable, which could not be further from the truth. Oftentimes, our reaction is a good one. We know, as private school leaders, our parents vote with their feet. If they don't like the way they're being served, they'll leave. Unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that does not move the needle with legislators very much. They want to go on the floor, they want to have data, they want to have stories, they want to have proof when they make these arguments. So it needs to all be there. Raising awareness in your community. The question that I always ask is, if your school closed tomorrow, would anyone know it's gone? If the answer to that is no, I would really encourage you to get out in your communities and, meet the mayor, meet the police chief, meet anyone who holds public office. How many of you are part of the Chamber of Commerce or in your city? If you're not, I'd look into that, okay? You will be surprised how much help you will find from people who understand who your school is and what your school does and the way it serves the community. One of my good friends who works for the Nebraska Catholic Conference always says, as private school leaders, we want to be the action, not the reaction. And part of being that action, part of driving opportunities for our kids, is the willingness to show why our schools are contributing to our community. Last thing I'll hit on here is accountability. And I just want to bring this up, and I'll preface this. I know we have school leaders of all types in the room. So I'm just going to throw this out for your information, and I'm not going to tell you, how I think anyone should feel about this. I'd never tell another school leader how to feel about accountability. Each school is unique unto itself. So in South Carolina, in this last session, they passed an ESA bill that would have served, I think it was like 7,500 students in the first year it was open. It passed the House, it passed the Senate. It had to go to a committee hearing, which is a mix of Senate and House members, to be approved. And the Senate Majority Leader who was overseeing the committee, even though the votes were there to pass it and give 7,500 kids this opportunity, he never brought it to a vote because of one thing. He wanted the accountability of that the public school test must be mandatory for any student who received the scholarship. And the House and Senate committees had decided not to put it in there. So he essentially killed the bill right there on the floor. One legislator, one perspective, killed the bill. And so I only share this example with you, and some of these things that are up here that you're reading were comments he made in a newspaper article after that. And you may have a difference of perspective on how you feel when you read those things. For me, a state test is not an apples-to-apples comparison to a nationally norm reference test I select for my school as a private school leader. That's my own feeling on that for a number of reasons. You may feel differently. I also think accountability, there's a couple questions that need to be answered. And I would just ask you as a school leader, how are you accountable as a school leader? If you haven't thought about that, Phyllis was up talking about accreditation. Accreditation is a great way to find accountability if you're looking for it, because you're setting your vital areas for growth over a multi-year period. But also, who are you accountable to? And who should you be accountable to? And again, I'm not here to answer that question for you, but it's something I would give consideration because there are a lot of opponents to school opportunities right now who think you should be accountable to them. And so your voice is critical in carrying this accountability conversation. When all was said and done in South Carolina, I asked our partners down there, did you talk to this gentleman about accountability? And they said, yes. I said, okay, what did you say to him? And they said, well, we had, the directors of this school group come in, the directors of this school group come in. I said, how many school leaders and parents did you bring in to talk to the legislator? Well, we brought the school groups in. And I said to them, so the school groups, which are basically all lobbyists, for those of you who don't know, and are at the Capitol all the time, were lied to, and there's no consequence for them. I said, if you had brought principals, you had brought parents in to have that conversation with him, would he have had the ability to do what he did and not have accountability for it on the back end? I don't know. But again, when you're dealing with constituents versus lobbyists, it's a very, very different thing for a lot of legislators. So bonus opportunity. For those of you who are further into your advocacy journey, I would ask, what are you doing to recruit your peers? What are you doing to educate your peers? We need more people in this journey. The reality is, I'm sure someday you would all like to retire. I'm sure someday, no matter how successful your school becomes, you're gonna have to hand the keys over to someone else. So how will they know to pick up the rope, and how will they know to continue pressing forward to give the kids the opportunities that you want them to have? That's only gonna come by you pulling it along and propping those people up as you go. And the other thing I'll say, I know for me as a school leader, if I talked to 4 or 5 of my peers and we all thought something was a good idea, it was a lot easier for us to go out and take action. And so I would encourage you to talk to your peers when opportunities for advocacy come, not just for school choice, but for anything. And use your collective voice to move the needle. So I'll end with this. At AFC, we have a school leader fellowship. It's an 8-month program where we invite school leaders from around the nation to come and learn to be better advocates for school opportunities and choices for their kids. Our second cohort just launched last week, actually. This picture was from last year. It was our pilot group. We had 10 school leaders from 7 different states. This year we have 17 school leaders from 11 different states. So the idea is to bring together a national network of school leaders to not only help continue to press for options for children, but also to help inform our work at AFC. I've pushed since I've started with AFC that the voices of school leaders not only need to be represented at the legislature, but in the work we do. We need your help knowing what works. We need your help knowing where the problems are. And we need your help helping us bring that data and that information to the conversation as we strive for more opportunities for kids. Typically, I like to do a lot more conversation than this, but I promised you I'd get you to dinner in a timely fashion. So I will open it up for questions, just maybe 1 or 2, Denisha, if we have any, and if not, and you're ready to eat, I totally understand, and I'm happy to answer any questions as I see you at dinner. Any questions I can answer for anybody? Yes, I'm happy to share it. Yeah, I'll have Denisha share it out with y'all. Any other questions? What state are you from? Louisiana. Talk to this gentleman, Paul Dauphin, over here in the corner. Paul is our Louisiana state lead, and he can, the program is by nomination only. And so if you're not in an AFC state, contact Denisha or myself directly, and we can have a conversation, definitely. All right. Yes? So we'll start assembling our next cohort in June to start next October. Yeah, so, but, you know, we can give you more information on that too, I think, if Denise is okay with it. All right? Yes. I appreciate that note. I will also couple it with the only reason we have our ESA program in Arizona that everybody keeps talking about is because the parents basically went out and fought against a possible ballot initiative. So thank you for that note. I appreciate it.